This morning, I went to uh, the wake service for Ken Wise, our maintenance supervisor since 2010. Most of you know, passed away. His name's been mentioned at Mass. His services were at St. Peter's United Church of Christ over on Clover Mill Road, so maybe 8 or 9 minutes from here. And I went even before the thing began because I wanted to spend a little bit of time with his family. And his brother they had pictures of him, as people often do at funerals. A beautiful, cute little church, and there's windowsills, and on the windowsills they had pictures of his life. And I only knew him from when he was in his mid-50s here. And there was all these pictures when he was young, and some of them when he was a little boy. He was a boy I didn't even recognize. And his brother's showing me these pictures, and I said, "Is that him?" And I couldn't, and then when he was like in his 30s, and then when he was out doing different things, he was a big hunter. There was pictures of him hunting, and I texted I was just, I have this experience there this morning as I've had at many funerals, that we do this, right? There's this ritual. You got all these pictures, and there's something about it here, like in a glimpse, in a very short, brief time, you get to see a person's life, usually from the very beginning until the very end, and all the stages in between, just like that. And what's surprising is when you see that, it becomes apparent we're constantly changing. You don't look the same when you're this age, and very, very quickly you change to the point that, like this morning, I didn't even recognize when it's about the 7-year-old Ken Wise. And I took some pictures and I sent them to a good friend who sent me back an intriguing phrase from Walt Whitman. Most of us had Walt Whitman, the great American writer, the poet of the 1800s. Most of us had to study him at one point or another. Famous work, Leaves of Grass. There's in the Leaves of Grass, within Leaves of Grass, there's a famous long poem, the Song of Myself. And this little part that was sent to me, texted to me, was a famous line. This long poem, and this is almost at the very end. It's the 51st section. There's only 52. And it's symbolically, this long poem, it's at the end of the man's life. And I'll tell you the line that was sent to me in a minute, but the section begins, the past, here's an old person close to the end of his life, and in a moment of reflection, the past and the present wilt. The past and the present wilt. I have filled them and emptied them. The past and the present wilt, I have filled them and I've emptied them, and proceed to fill my next fold of the future, looking on into the future. Listener up there, he says, speaking to God now. And there's an exclamation point, like he wants to know from God, and maybe he's even a little bit angry. Listener up there, what have you to confide to me? Powerful scene, powerful section of a poem. Listener up there, past, present have wilted. I've filled them and now I've emptied them, and proceed to fill my next fold. What have you to confide to me? Look in my face he has a beautiful line, while I snuff the sidle of evening, the evening of life. He says to God, talk honestly, for I stay only a minute longer. I'm close to the end. Speak to me, God, about what's next. Perhaps he's frightened about what's next. In this famous section, do I contradict myself? Very well, then, I contradict myself. And here's the line that was sent to me. I am large, I contain multitudes. I am large and I contain multitudes. He's looking at the mystery of all these years, the mystery of himself, the past, the present. I filled and I've emptied them again, looking to what's going to become of me next, crying out to God. Right? Talks about I am large, I contain multitudes. Looking at the mystery of himself. We are large, we contain multitudes. This section is meant to kind of evoke a self-awareness and an openness. The contradiction is to contradict the past self, the present self. In this sense, to be open to, so that we can be open to what the God he's crying out to is going to create next. And accept our unknown future. In fact, welcome it. In fact, welcome it. I am large, I contain multitudes. I think one of the dangers, and I certainly fall into it many times, is we get very reductionist about ourselves and each other. We can define ourselves by our worst moments, or maybe our best. Our failures. Or maybe we define ourselves with the past or the present or what could have been. It's easy to reduce ourselves, right? And to miss the magnificence of the mystery of the human person. I couldn't help but think of all this because what was on my mind when I went to that wake this morning was this homily. Saturday is, I'm really spending the bulk of my time, any thoughts and things I've had earlier in the week. So I'm thinking of the transfiguration scene. I'm thinking of the transfiguration of Jesus as I'm watching these photos of Ken when he was younger and all these stages of his life and this line of this poem that was sent to me. The transfiguration is a really powerful scene. You know what it's preceded by? It's preceded by just a few verses before. Jesus asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" And they ask him questions, and Peter gets it right. You are the Messiah. Doesn't really understand what he's saying. You're Peter, on this rock I'll build my church. And right after that, he goes right into, you know what? You call me Messiah. I have to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to have to suffer greatly from the elders and chief priests. I'm going to be killed and on the third day be raised. And you know what? The guy who just confessed him as Messiah gets really upset. It says Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. God forbid, Lord. No such thing will ever happen to you. No such thing will ever happen to you. Wow. Think of the Whitman poem. I filled the past and the present and emptied them. Peter, like all of us, can't envision a future. You know what he's stuck on? The way that he conceives of Jesus. For him, Messiah meant powerful, conqueror, going to deliver us from death. You're going to save us from all the horrific things that have to happen in life, Fred. You're going to save us from suffering. And here he says, right after the Messiah, I got to go to Jerusalem. And I'm going to suffer at the hands of the chief priests and the elders, and I'm going to be killed and rise again. And he probably couldn't even hear the rise again part because he's stuck on wow, this doesn't make sense to me. This certainly, talk about Whitman's contradiction. This contradicts what he thought was Messiah. And Jesus says something stinging, absolutely stinging. He says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me." Wow. Peter can't envision the transfiguration of Jesus, the suffering Jesus, from the present moment into the suffering Jesus. And what does he say? You're an obstacle to me. Man, you know what? Part of that Whitman thing, it's easy. Don't be an obstacle to God. It's easy to be an obstacle to God. We tend to be, it's really easy to be afraid of the future. What's God going to do with me? What's going to happen next, right? I filled the past, I filled the present, and I've emptied them. Get behind me, Satan. You're an obstacle to me. You are not thinking as God does, but as human beings do. Boy, is that a challenge, not to think as God does. St. Paul's line that's permeated through his epistles. What does he have to do? What changes in his life? He talks about putting on the mind of Christ. In a pivotal moment that he had to renew as he got older. Put on the mind of Christ. I have to put on the mind of Christ. And when he says it, you get the sense it's not easy. After that, just he tells them, I have to go and I have to suffer. What comes right after that? You have to suffer. Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Wow. Maybe they wanted to walk away. Maybe Peter was kind of upset that he even said those words, you are the Messiah. As Jesus starts to flesh out the meaning. What does it mean? Really? You sure that's what you want? And then right after that, perhaps because this was so upsetting to them, they could not envision what would be next. Is they go up, he takes them up the mountain. And up the mountain, what happens? He's transfigured. He's transfigured. His face becomes like the sun. His clothes dazzling white. Is that, people say, oh, that's hard to imagine. Really? Again, from just a material level, we're constantly being transfigured. As I said, I looked at those pictures and I couldn't even tell it was the same guy. You looked at my baby pictures, you might, especially if I'm amongst my brothers, you're not going to know it's me. If I'm still here, if I live as long as my father did, and I'm 91, and all of a sudden a 91-year-old Gary's in front of you, you're not going to recognize me. He's transfigured. But he's transfigured in such a way because he's God. What is the one? God is light. In him there is no darkness. So he becomes light. And who shows up but Moses and Elijah? Why? Who else went up the mountain and met God, and God was light in the form of fire? Moses who represents the law. Who else went up the mountain and their God shows up again in the Old Testament? The prophet Elijah, the greatest prophet. He goes up to Mount Carmel, Moses up to Mount Sinai. So here what? We have the representative of the law of Moses and the greatest prophet Elijah. What did we hear earlier in this gospel in the Sermon on the Mount? I have not come to abolish the law and the prophets. I've come to fulfill them. Goes up into the mountain and he's transfigured before them. And here's Moses. It's Jesus' entourage. His heavenly entourage shows up, right? Moses and Elijah. Wow. What a powerful moment. Meant to teach them something. Pastor's Corner this week. As Christians, we're called to conversion and transformation. That's not a spiritual nicety. That's a powerful statement that has consequences in our lives. And it's a call. We're called to conversion and transformation. Quite simply, God's asked us to acknowledge our sinfulness, repent and change. Lent. Changes our internal and external. Further down, what often gets less attention in this discussion is that God's ultimate goal for us goes beyond just loving and forgiving, but having us join him in heaven someday. And here's what the apostles they're given a glimpse of. They're given a glimpse that they're going to need, because they have to watch what Jesus predicted of his own passion. And then in the days and the years to follow, their participation in that. The life of the apostles was not easy. All of them but John were martyred. Some powerful things to ponder this week and to take really seriously. In a world that's stuck in the present and in the past. We are large and we contain multitudes because God is grand and his design for us is grand. I close with the end of the Pastor's Corner this week. Jesus revealed himself on that mountain in part to strengthen, inspire, and prepare his apostles for what was to come. May this gospel serve that function for us as well. May we also open our eyes to the myriad ways God reveals himself to us as he draws us ever closer to himself and our own transfiguration. May his grace do its work in us. Amen.